out a little bit from last term as we enter into this term that we need to deal with. How about this, John? I'm going to kind of clarify the message that I sent you just a little bit. But we completely understand and know what the requirements are on you to get through a paramedic program. And unfortunately, that is a nationwide dilemma for anybody trying to get through paramedic. And that is, we are demanding of you the amount of information that we are shoving at you and that you're having to master, you're having to do in not even a full year. You're having to do in about 7.5 months. And that same information is presented to nursing students over the course of 2 years. And we know that. We know that.
As well as physicians.
Yeah, I mean, we know that, right? Seattle, the Board of Medical Directors up in Seattle, on purpose made the decision that paramedics in that area were going to wear doctor smocks on purpose. Because when they were discussing that and they went through that process of determining what paramedics in that area had to know to provide proper care, they started looking at the information that they were given in their paramedic course and the information that their medical physicians were expecting them to be able to perform and the level they were expecting to perform. And as they started to look at that, they realized that though they didn't have quite as many topics, the topics the paramedics did have were every bit the same topics that those medical doctors had in their 3rd year of medical school, which is the year that they earned their doctor smocks, which is why they started having paramedics do that. It was a respect issue for the paramedics. We get that, okay? Just know that you're not the only one that's been in that situation. Everybody's gone through paramedic has been there. The thing that you need to understand, and you're gonna get this, all of us can attest to it. Derek can attest to it. Some of you can already attest to it who, when you're in other departments, as you're doing things in other departments, there are paramedics out there who subscribe to this, I guess, overall paramedic attitude of don't worry about all the information. Just if you see this, do this. If you see that, do this. If it's an EKG, just find out if it's fast or slow. Don't worry about what it is, and just do this. And the reality is that is not where paramedic is, and it's not where it's going. And paramedic is only getting harder as we go through. The demands on paramedics is only getting higher every single year. And that's been made very, very clear in the direction that the nation is going. There's a difference in society now, right? It was acceptable back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s for people to die in their 70s and 80s, and therefore we didn't have a whole lot of demand to take care of them because they're almost dead anyway. People now expect to live until they're 90 or 100, and they expect that to be a good quality of life, and so they're expecting that things are done better to help them get to that point. So what we do on scene has a higher impact now than it had in the 60s and 70s when we were just picking people up and taking them to the hospital. And maybe they lived and maybe they died, and it didn't matter a whole lot. It was acceptable in the early 90s for us to be doing CPR that had a 3% success rate at bringing back a return of spontaneous circulation. That was acceptable. But then when we started doing some research and found out that CPR can have an 83% success rate of returning spontaneous circulation under the right circumstances, that changed society's attitude towards how things are done. So now what we do on scene makes a difference in things, in that survivability. And not just survivability, because it's not just about return of spontaneous circulation on scene, it's return of spontaneous circulation and leaving the hospital neurologically intact so that you can have a good life afterwards, right? And so the demand on the EMS system and the demand on paramedics is increasing dramatically, right? Things are being looked at a lot more carefully, and the demand of your knowledge base and the demand on your ability to not make mistakes and do the right thing is going up. So I totally get that that's the case, and I totally understand that those demands are completely 100% unreasonable. And yet they're still there. And we're still gonna demand it of you, right? So we're at a stage in this second term of class as we're moving along, and you're getting closer and closer and closer to your field internships and closer and closer and closer to being a licensed paramedic, where things kind of heat up just a little bit. The honeymoon portion is done. You had a great first term. Good job. Excellent. I realize that you're at varying levels of how quickly you're assimilating information and being able to use that information. But some of you might need to make some alterations in priorities or alterations in what you're doing over the next few months to make sure that you are not only having the time, but also coming up with the methods for getting this information down and making it solid, right? So a few things that'll be a little bit different this term compared to last term. One, you're just expect that every single term will have some level of evaluation, every single week will have some level of evaluation on things. We'll hit medications hard. We'll be demanding that you understand and know medications inside and out. You'll be hit on EKG hard every single week. You'll have to find ways to start identifying and understanding how those things link together. We'll be starting part of that process today. That'll all be part of it. We're going to be pretty scenario intensive in labs from here on out, and we're looking for your ability to integrate the information that you've been gathering and apply that information and come up with good decision-making processes. We're looking to see that you are making good decisions, or that you are going through a good critical thinking process with your decisions, and that it's backed up with information, right? It's backed up with knowledge. So whatever that means to you in terms of how to adjust your schedule or your life, knowing that these are unreasonable demands, but unreasonable demands make the difference between people who are going to make it and people who aren't, just in general, in anything you do, right? So keep that in mind. We understand that there's a lot that we're demanding of you, but it's not going to change. The demand is still going to be there, and the demand's only going to get higher. So whatever that says to you in terms of how you need to adjust your life, assuming that you want to pursue this, then please do that accordingly. Good? You're not alone. We were at a conference for a few days ago. I don't even know what day it is anymore, but a few days ago we were at a conference with 60 other people in the room, all doing paramedic programs, and it's the same. I mean, we were talking about, well, let's see, we had paramedic programs from Alaska, Florida, Virginia was there,
New York,
California was there, New York was there, Maryland was there, Texas was there. It's the same everywhere in the country. The demand on you is the same no matter where you're going to go, and it's just what it is, right? But it's fair to your patients for you to be awesome, and it's not fair to them for you to not be. Right? Good? I talked to you guys at one point in time, I don't remember when, but being an advocate for your patient, we talked about little things like hypoglycemia isn't about just piling them with a bunch of sugar. You have to think about what's going to happen after you leave. So you think about having them eat meals. You think about staying there, doing your part to make sure that you're not coming back with some sort of a paradoxical drop of their CBG after you leave, right? Because you piled them with sugar and they didn't do anything else. Right? We're looking to be advocates for the patients because we want them to be able. You're striving to put yourself out of business. You never will, but that's your goal. Your goal is to educate and strive to put yourself out of business. Right? There's 7 billion people. You're never going to go out of business. Someone's always going to do something stupid, and someone's always going to get hurt. But you're striving to educate and put people out of business because it's a quality of life issue too. Make sense? Okay. So a couple of things along those lines. One, when we send out communication to you, make sure you read it. Some of you are, for whatever reason, not receiving our communication in a timely fashion. And I think it's primarily because you're not checking the the messages that are coming. Like, you don't have your profile on Moodle set up to send messages to the right place. Figure that out, right? Last term, Marlena sent out an email that only asked you to do one thing, and that was to respond that you received it. And it took 10 weeks to get everyone to respond, right? And that wasn't just because of one person. There were 3 or 4 that just didn't respond. And I said something twice. I said something around week 6, and I said something around week 8. And it still took 2 more weeks after that to get everybody to finish with just the simple, I got this email. That's all that was required, right? Sometimes we'll send an email, like Derek will send out an email that says you have from X time to X time to sign up for your shifts, and we'll find that 90% of people are signed up, and then there's a couple people who missed it, and then we'll send them a message saying, well, they're not available. But they were available to 90% of the class for 2 weeks, right? Or we'll get a message like Derek will get a message that says, hey, can you sign me up for, and it's like, no, I can't. That was your instructions to go and sign up. I'm not gonna be the one to sign you up, right? So make sure that you're reading through. And this is one of the hardest things that I can say, coming from a standpoint of I believe, and all of you should know this by now, most of you that have had additional classes from me know this, but I absolutely believe in being challenged. I think you should challenge me with what it is that I talk to you about, right? I don't mind being questioned. I believe that's important. And so it's hard for me to say what I'm about to say, because I believe in questioning, and I believe in you asking questions. But there are some questions, I know that people used to say there's no such thing as a stupid question, and I kind of believe that also for the most part, but there are some that maybe they're not stupid questions, but there are questions that can hurt. For example, in academia, outside of this class, in like other classes, when a student comes up to a professor and they notice that they have a B+, and they were like 1 point away from an A-, and they really want that A-, when that student comes up to the professor and says, well, can't you just give me the A-, that question actually hurts. It's actually a harmful question for the student to ask, because it makes the assumption that the professor gave them a grade. The professor didn't give them a grade. They earned a grade, and the professor just wrote down the grade they earned, right? And for someone to come up and say, can't you just give me that extra point? That's a harmful question, because it kind of plugs into what the attitude of that particular student is. And when that professor is then looking at things like medical school application letters of recommendation and stuff, they're looking at that going, well, that student didn't take ownership on what they did. They didn't, so I really don't have anything good to say about that situation, right? So even though that question, I know that some people walk in and say, well, it doesn't hurt to ask, but some of those things actually do hurt you to ask for. It would be different if that student had come to that professor and said something like, I noticed that this is the grade that I earned, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss any opportunities that I might still have where I could perform and still get that extra point, right? Because now they're saying, I'm willing to do work if there was work left to do. And then if the professor says, no, we're done, but this is it, that student needs to accept it and move on. So I had a student a few years ago that came to me. I taught a class that the whole goal of the class was to get an A. You had to work to not get an A in the class. The class was designed around that. It was an advanced first aid class built around a group of students that were going to do a particular activity at the University of Oregon, and they really wanted to do that activity, and so you rarely got anybody that didn't get an A because it was a stepping stone to something that they really wanted to do. I had a student that was getting a D in the class. You have to work really hard to get a D in this class, and he came to me. I did not hold a final exam because we did exams along the way that accumulated to the final exam. And he actually sent me an email in the last week of class before final exam, knowing that we didn't have an exam, a final exam, but we met on the final exam week to hand out certifications and to help them to move forward into the project that they were about to do. And he sent me an email that said, so I know that we don't have a final exam during finals week, but you have set aside that time for us to do extra credit, right? Where did you get that idea? You haven't done anything the entire term. You're getting a D. And I'm somehow gonna offer extra credit for in the last day of class to help you not fail the class, right? So even though I don't like to say that there are any stupid questions because I don't want people to not ask questions for clarification. But you have to think carefully about the questions you do ask because it does give insight into who and how you are thinking. And that can hurt in the end. Does that make sense? Right? It's one thing to say to Derek, I'm a bonehead, I missed the deadline, I can't do this. What can I do? Is there anything I can do? I'm willing to accept the consequences. It's another thing to say something to him like, I can't find something and it's not available. What can you do to open that back up for me? Right? It's a different attitude process. So be thinking about that as we move forward, and especially now that we're going to start sending you out more in the hospitals, and then pretty soon into agencies where people are looking at things like that because they're trying to find out whether or not you can be a quality medic. Good?
But at the same time, I don't want you to be afraid to, if you really need something,
Exactly.
ask me.
Right.
I'm now
Find the happy
talking
medium.
75 more EMT students this week, so think of that. I love
75?
you guys. Yeah, between Florence, Corvallis, and here at Lane, 75 EMT students are gonna be now, my responsibility is that, clinicals, all that stuff, so. But I don't want you to be afraid to ask if you need stuff.
Do you need a cape?
He does. So look through instructions. If we're not clear on instructions, ask for that clarification. But make sure you've read through everything that you need to read through, or make sure that you've identified everything. Because it's telling when 20 of 24 students have done it the right way, and 4 have not, and 4 of them are confused. That usually means that the instructions were clear and they just weren't read by those 4 students. Does that make sense? It'd be different if we had 4 students that were able to accomplish it and 20 students that are confused. That's our fault, right? Questions?
And I know we're gonna talk more about this after the later today or tomorrow,
Yes.
but please try to get your data in before the deadline and your shifts lock. That makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of people asking to unlock the shifts.
You, crap, I forgot this innovation I got in the ER, it was awesome. I don't mind opening, but just writing it off like, oh, I'll just have Derek open it some other time. No, you get done with your shift, spend an hour and do your documentation. Thank you.
Good? Questions? We have a lot to accomplish this term, so there's a lot going on.